Hello and good evening. My name is Ashley Squires, and tonight I'll be presenting on my personal goals as well as my expected hopeful professional outcomes as a result of this doctorate. Currently, I'm the Chief Academic Officer for the Diocese of Cleveland, and I have taken a bit of an unorthodox path towards this career. I truly believe it was through my experiences and my interactions along the way that have arrived me at this immense responsibility and quite frankly a privilege of influencing so many students in Cleveland and the greater Northeast Ohio area. I wanted to share tonight my leadership style as well as my learning theories as it relates to my personal goals and professional outcomes through photos. I think it's really important. I'm a visual learner. I think it's really important to convey your message in a way that speaks to you as a learner. And for me, seeing photos and being able to provide context to those photos will helps me. And it also paints the picture for you all how I view the world and really how I view my role in this world as an educator. And so let's get started. In 1957 in Montgomery, Alabama, Martin Luther King gave a sermon at Dexter Baptist Church. During that sermon, he asked the community, life's most urgent question is, what can you do for others? And he posed that to the community on the sermon. The sermon was entitled Conquering Self-Centeredness. And it was in a series of sermons based on how do we get out of ourselves and really focus back on the community. This speech was done 2 years after Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And I think, the fact that this happened 2 years after Rosa Parks event on the bus, I think it speaks to the idea that we as a society need a context in which to develop our viewpoints, in which to develop our opinions. And I think it was, Miss Parks' experience on the bus that sparked something in Martin Luther King. I mean, obviously I'm not in his head and I'll never be able to ask him that question, but I truly think that this event sparked something in Mr. King to get in front of thousands of people and deliver sermons or deliver speeches and be able to speak to the masses about what's right and about really putting service back into the community. In 1965, so about 9 years after Martin Luther King gave that speech, that sermon, Lyndon B. Johnson signed an act, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, into law. Martin Luther King, as you can see in this photo, was present at the signing of it into law. And again, I think Lyndon B. Johnson signed that into law because of actions that had happened previously. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. Martin Luther King gives a speech, a sermon to talk about service, and then 9 years later something is enacted and now African Americans have rights, have voting rights, and I think all of those pieces led up to this amazing reform for our world, for our country, and for our society. And I really do see my role as currently as Chief Academic Officer, but really more holistically as an educator and a leader in education, to be able to sow the seeds for service so that those after me have something to model, also have something to look to as an example. And so I really do see myself as someone who can be that for people. And I didn't come across this style of leadership. I didn't think of servant leadership suddenly one day, but it was really through the actions of the leaders that have come before me that I've had the privilege of working for. One of which is Linda Wayman. Linda Wayman was a principal that I had. She was my first boss back in Philadelphia when I was a school counselor. I had done my work as a school counselor, and Linda Wayman hired me, and for that I'll be forever grateful. Linda Wayman is a principal who grew up in the city, in the neighborhood that we worked. And she would often tell the story about how her mother would take her on the SEPTA bus, which was Philadelphia's public transportation. And her mother would put her on the bus every day, and they would drive throughout Philadelphia because her mother really wanted her to see all of Philadelphia, not just the small neighborhood that they lived. And Mrs. Wayman refers to that often as a formative experience for her, because she started to see the impact, not just the impact of her neighborhood, but really like what was going on in Philadelphia at that time. And it was that experience and being exposed to the world around her that just had her decide to become a principal. And so then she became a principal back at the school that she once attended. So again, those experiences, that broadening, that engagement in society, that engagement in activities outside of yourself, helped form her decision to become a principal in Philadelphia. And she hired me to work at E.W. Rhodes. At the time, it was called the Young Women's Leadership School at Rhodes. It's since been changed back to E.W. Rhodes. But at the time, Mrs. Wayman hired me, and every staff member in the building, whether it was a school counselor like myself or the 7th grade math teacher, we were all leaders in the building with her. And she led through service. And one poignant, very formative moment in my professional life was when Mrs. Wayman asked the entire staff to commit to 9 Saturdays in a row, being at school very early on those Saturdays, to do some intensive tutoring for our students that were below grade level. And we had quite a few. And, not many people wanted to get up on Saturday, right, after they've done a full day's worth of, a full week's worth of teaching, to come in on a Saturday. But Mrs. Wayman, the way that she spoke about it to us, and how this was our duty, this was our responsibility, this was the service that we had elected to do as we elected to work at her school. So we all agreed, and that first Saturday morning when I showed up for tutoring, Mrs. Wayman was the first person to answer the door. She was there every Saturday with us. So it wasn't like she had asked us to do something that she wouldn't do herself. And it was that experience of her leading us through service, leading us through her actions, which really just continued to formulate for me that this idea of, we have to be servant leaders. I have to be a servant leader. I have to practice what I preach. I have to be the work and share in the work with those that I'm leading. Really was solidified for me. And I think, when I think about this work as an influencer in education reform, I think about it, in terms of how are kids learning. And I think about my own experiences and about Mrs. Wayman's experiences, and Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, that it was through those experiences that helped to create your perception of life and perception of reality. And I think about constructivist learning, that you learn through engagement, you learn through experiencing. You don't learn solely through a textbook or through a lecture. And I think that is how I learn best. And I think it's also how many of our students learn, as well as our teachers. If we want our students to not be sitting in rows all the time and not just be listening in empty vessels where they just get all this information dumped in, if the whole expectation around instruction is that they're engaging with the learning, they're engaging with experiences, they have these formative moments where they look back 20 years later and think, that's when I made that connection towards such and such. That is how we need to be preparing our teachers. Our teachers have to be engaged, have constructivist learning opportunities where they're engaging with the learning, they're engaging with an educational pedagogy or a theory, and they're practicing. And so for me, my personal goal is obviously to finish this doctorate and to finish it with honors. And my professional outcome is to be the reformer, to help reform teacher preparation. Because why? Because our students deserve to have teachers that have had multiple and ample opportunity to practice and engage and learn through experiences. And I think having this doctorate and learning and being immersed in this education while also being able to practice it as a chief academic officer for the Diocese of Cleveland, I think really will help marry theory and practice really beautifully for me. And then I am then prepared to support our incoming teachers, because I think right now we are under preparing our teachers for what it's like to be as a first-year teacher or even as a fifth-year teacher. Teachers really need those experiences, and they need those moments, those aha moments where the synapses are firing, not because they're reading a book, but because they're seeing something in real world to help construct their experience with pedagogy and with best practice instructional strategies. And I think that is where I see myself. I see myself as that person who, once finishing this doctorate, I will have the theory, I will have the practice, and I want to provide those opportunities for teachers to come. And so I'm so excited at this opportunity, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to display my goals and my theories and my opinions and my practice visually, because again, that's the way I learn best. And I think if I can continue to share how I learn to help other teachers learn, to then in turn help their students learn, I think that is truly what it's all about. So thank you again for listening, and I am looking forward to expounding on all of these ideas over the next 3 years. Thank you so much.